Hello and welcome to another A-Tippling Philosopher video with me, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. And I am super excited today to bring you another guest who I will introduce in a second. But just while the adverts and things go on at the beginning of this sort of live stream event, I will use that time wisely. And by wisely, I mean, you know, to my own ends, which is to say, I've got a new book out. Most of you know this, but in case you don't, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, the Heaven, Hell, Satan, and Divine Design. So please grab that if you can. It's available on lots of sort of ebook formats, as well as in real sort of paper and stuff. Whatever, it's all good, and hopefully you will really enjoy that. And I just sent that to our guest tonight, and she can put that in one folder on her computer and probably never look at it again. But if she does, I'm sure she'll super enjoy it. Anyway, enough rambling on. That gets over the advertising bit for the live streamers. Thank you for tuning in. I am particularly happy for several reasons. One, because I will be speaking to an author of a great book, a book that I am still reading, but it is great so far. But it's also she's a woman. That sounds odd. Nothing particularly strange about that. But I find that I interview almost entirely men, and it's just really nice to get a bit of diversity on the channel. So you know, it's great. It's great that is taking place. Deborah Grace, author of Crucifying the Bible, welcome to this this interview. Thank you for agreeing to have a chat.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Well, I hope so. We don't know yet. You might really hate it, but let's hope not. So you've written a book, Crucifying the Bible, and that is available. In fact, I will just show everyone where that is. Here it is. It's on Amazon and other reputable places to buy it as well, I hope and assume. And it has a shed load of really good reviews. So that's fantastic. I advise everyone go out and buy it. I'm really enjoying it. Before we get into the book, though, give us a little bit of introductions to who you are, if you don't mind, and how you've got to where you are, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So I was raised in Christianity from birth, and I was honored along the way to become a mother. I'm a wife, daughter, sister, and an autodidact. So I love researching. I love just studying new things, learning new things. And 41 years in religion, the last several years were in Hebrew roots Messianic faith, which encompasses following all of the Bible and not just dismissing the laws of the Old Testament. So I was following the feasts and the Sabbaths.
Is that as a Christian?
And this was at the end of my religious journey. So I went from Pentecostal evangelical Christian belief system into converting to obeying all the laws. So I had sewn tzitzit into my clothing. I was making challah and observing Sabbath from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. I was honoring the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles, the Passover, the counting of the Omer, so on and so forth.
Wow.
And so 41 years into that, and then I took a couple of years to sort of re-identify myself, because it's a huge paradigm shift coming out of religion. Somewhat of an identity crisis for me, at least personally. And then in just over a year ago, I started writing Crucifying the Bible, and it was published in August. So it's been quite a turn of events in the last couple of years.
So thank you so much for Sobek Lord of the Four Corners for that super sticker. That's really generous. Thanks for your support. So what were were the catalysts? What were the triggers? What got you starting to doubt your very heavily invested in worldview?
Right. So, my mom converted to Hebrew roots Messianic faith about 14 years before I did. I didn't quite have the understanding, the knowledge, or the support at home at the time to make that transition. And I always trusted my mom because she never intentionally lied to me. I mean, obviously, the Bible doesn't support itself. It to me, it's not true. So I knew she was onto something, and it wasn't until I started caring for her while she was sick and dying. So I did that for about 9 months. And in that time period, she was kind of teaching me and saying, you know, this is what I believe. And I kept asking questions, and I'm like, okay, well, yeah, I'm ready. And did that for several years. So that in and of itself was a shift. That was, I guess, probably the very first beginning of my understanding of the Bible as it's been presented was not a wholly true, right? So then I was writing for the Validity of the Bible, mostly on social media, and these long articles and conclusions that I had drawn, and everybody kept saying, oh my gosh, it's so wonderful that the Holy Spirit is leading you to do this, and that's so right on. I could just feel the Holy Spirit just oozing out of every word that you're writing, and on and on and on and on and on, right? That didn't last. Because I had 3 articles that really were the very beginning of the dominoes, right? That led me away. And the first one was that Jesus could not have been sinless his whole life. If he was a 1-year-old lamb sacrifice, then a 30-year-old man doesn't line up. So the scripture that says he grew in grace, you don't grow in grace if you're perfect, right? You don't grow in grace if you don't need grace, right? So yeah, that didn't go over well.
So
and then
can I just I find that a really interesting area, which is something I've thought about before, which is to say that if someone is to be fully man, so if Jesus is supposed to be fully man and fully God,
right.
How can you be fully man and perfect? Like there's nothing that I've experienced about being a man or being a human that is close to perfection, and nor anyone else. And when you start thinking about, well, how did Jesus become a man? Well, he had half his DNA selected by God, and so does this not invalidate Jesus from being fully man? And if Jesus is perfect, like, is that really representative of mankind? And also, if a man can be perfect, why aren't the rest of us perfect, since God designed us and all this stuff? Are these sort of ideas that you played around with?
And made in his image, right? But the very definition of man is the antithesis of divine. And the very definition of divine is the antithesis to being human. So I don't understand how you have both. I never fully understood it, even as a Christian. And I was just told, you know, God works in mysterious ways, and we're not to know everything about him, and we'll just ask when we get there, and all these platitudes and excuses, right? Well, mathematically, every time you give an excuse for something, your probability of truthfulness goes down. Bayes' theorem.
Yeah.
So
the more hoops you have to jump for, the less likely it is to be true, like prima facie.
Right. Yeah. So the second one was about the new covenant, because there are prophecies that must be fulfilled in order for the new covenant to be in place. Worldwide knowledge of God is one of them, and that's not there. And flesh and blood was never a sign of the new covenant, even though Jesus says it was. It wasn't. The third one was calling out pastors and their Old Testament requirements and duties, job responsibilities, and that they're supposed to fulfill. Doesn't include those who have already found Christ. They were supposed to be sent to the lost or to the backsliding, and the Holy Spirit was supposed to be teaching the parishioners, or the believers. That is who God sent to be the teacher, not the pastors. Those are only for the lost. And I was like, well, I'm not lost. And that went over like a lead balloon, and we were disfellowshipped or uninvited to a congregation that we were attending.
So this is you starting to like some of these things, some of these claims don't line up. And
Right.
then was it just a case of a house of cards? Then one thing leads on to another. And once you because I've been talking recently about like how I fully understand how Christians become hyper literalist. Because as soon as you accept that this may be symbolic or allegorical, and as soon as you say that this might not be true, you can then do that to every claim, and then it's like a house of cards. So in order to stop it being a house of cards, it's all or nothing. Like, so I do understand how Christians do that.
Yeah, so those were the first little chinks in the armor, but it wasn't until I came across Scott Schub and his series of videos on the New Testament and questioning the validity of the Messiah of the New Testament. His channel is Viet to Phila Productions, and I believe he is still a follower of the Old Testament. But his series on the New Testament, that was the demarcation, if you will, of my full deconversion. And that took 8-10 months to fully digest and say, okay, yeah, I'm done.
Right. And Richard Williams said something here that we'll come on to later, because actually this forms, you do write about this in your book, that human sacrifice of Jesus was just a follow-on from the Old Testament animal sacrifices, in other words, a convenient made-up story. And you might take an issue with that to a degree by saying, actually, it's not what you'd expect. These kind of sacrifices aren't what you would expect, maybe given, or there are loads of issues that you have with the whole notion of sacrifice involved with Jesus. As far as
right.
We'll come on to that in a little bit later. So before we really get onto your book, so did you have in your deconversion, was there anything that as you are now, how do you think this has affected your life? Do you feel like you're in a better place, or what's the change that you felt in your life from deconverting?
Well, I don't have fear. That's the biggest thing. And in some of my follow-up research on some other world religions and some other older writings, one of my favorite is from the writings of Thoth that says, "Cause thou not fear, for fear is bondage." And I found that to be quite pivotal. I'm like, yeah, if you're causing fear and you're supposed to be a benevolent God, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't line up. But my whole worldview, like, aside from the peace, everything has been up for reevaluation. My politics, my relationships, my enforcement of personal boundaries.
This is fascinating, because I'm absolutely fascinated in the intersection of politics and religion, particularly with evangelical sort of very right fundamentalist Christianity in America, where you have a real vehement sort of right-wing Christianity, often right-wing politics involved with your belief system. And in fact, it appears that politics underwrites a belief rather than belief underwriting the politics. So there's been some research that suggests that when someone's church doesn't agree with their political view, they will change church. Rather than adapt politics to your belief, you will adapt your belief to your politics. Which is all good and well, very interesting, and we can spend hours talking about that. But when you leave religion, then that's really interesting, because you are then removing that part. But are you still that political person, and can people change? So it's just really the direction of causality is interesting.
Yeah, it's very different. I think one of the most stark realizations for me, looking at the Bible objectively without having those God goggles on, or Jesus goggles, whatever you want to call them, I realized in just taking another look, the God of the Bible is not pro-life in any way, shape, or form. Numbers 5 is probably the best example of that, in where he makes his own concoction that causes abortions if a man just thinks that his wife has cheated. And then, this scorched earth, continual killing and genocides, floods, fire from heaven, dashing children on rocks, tearing open the women's pregnant stomachs, so on and so forth. It's all about death. It's a death cult. It's not some sort of lifeline for your eternal soul. And in that offering it's wrapped up in conditions wherein it's fully extortion.
Right, interesting.
So my biblical views I am so not pro-life anymore. I have to be pro-choice, and then being able to look at the other side of the argument with compassion now instead of vile loathing where I used to. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Well, yeah, because if we're going to force women to stay pregnant, then we may as well force people to give up a kidney.
Yeah, interesting. I can. Oh, this is where you get into loads of arguments about, well, is that a false analogy? And like, I mean, it's the whole idea that you've got a human life, that it's a human being, which I completely contest, and I've written plenty on personhood and arguments about.
Right. I mean, there's plenty of arguments too, but even in the womb, God didn't care about the children in the womb.
Yeah, and I think someone here says, Doc Pluromanaut says, the Bible places no value on fetuses or infants less than 1 month old, Leviticus 27:6, for example. So my mate Rob here, who is a Christian Universalist, says, so I'm curious, I also reject an infallible Bible and fundamentalist Christianity. What stops you being a liberal? Are you still open to theism in other forms? I presume you are a liberal, maybe, but yeah.
So right. So for most of my ideologies, I haven't taken a Nolan test in quite a while. I'd be interested to. I should probably do that. Take a Nolan survey and find out where I'm at on the spectrum politically. But yeah, my husband has recently said you're a liberal now. You're a liberal now, and I'm like, okay, it is what it is. It's fine. But he asked another question about I'm sorry, what was the
well, just like, are you still open to theism in other forms? Yeah, you can reject
so I can't say that there is no God, right? Because that puts me into a box to prove my position, and I won't do that. It isn't impossible. We cannot say anything is impossible, right? Within our own understanding of how our world and reality works. So until I am proven a God, then I'm just not convinced.
Yeah. So in the writing of your book, did you find that you were, as well as theologically finding fault with the Bible, were you also philosophically finding fault with the idea of God then as a whole? It was everything being tested.
Yeah, it doesn't really make sense in our reality. But like I said, it's not impossible, but I don't find it convincing in any form. Are we all connected? Do we live in a matrix? Is this just I don't know what type of existence this is in putting a theist behind it. My ontology isn't completely solidified or formulated yet. What I know is that I cannot base my worldview or my belief systems on this Bible.
Right, and don't go down the whole matrix route there,
because I just don't know. I'm like,
my mate
whatever.
My mate Rob has become an idealist, right? So he believes everything is non-material, and so you'll get him too excited. So just
I don't know. Like, I'm just throwing other concepts out there. Like, I haven't really delved into any of that stuff, but I'm just like, I don't know. I'm comfortable in the not knowing right now. But right now, my mission and what takes up most of my time is trying to get other people to see the fallacies in the Bible, to see the major contradictions, and that it doesn't support itself.
Just your ability to say I don't know is a massive step, I imagine, away from where you used to be. Like to
Oh,
say, I don't know, because the whole thing about fundamentalism is certainty.
Right. I'm not trying to make excuses or justifications for a God whose quote unquote word doesn't make sense, and it always contradicts itself.
So what then led you to write this book? So here you were like starting to find these problems, and then, which is fine for you yourself personally. You're like, right, you're an autodidact, so you love researching things yourself and learning stuff yourself. You find out all this stuff, but then what makes you go, and therefore I'm going to write a book on it? It's important enough to write a book on it.
Well, since the time I was about 25, people have been telling me, one day you're going to write a book. And even in Christianity, several people told me, oh, you should write a book on that subject. You should write a book on that. You should just compile all your Facebook notes and articles and make a book. And I was never fully comfortable with that idea. And I'm glad I never was. But this book actually was written by accident. My sister texted me about this guy who was trying to parallel the mark of the beast with the COVID-19 vaccine. And I started writing a response to her in Word, just trying to make it cohesive. And then like 3 pages later, I was like, I think I just started a book. And then I was like, I have enough knowledge and understanding, and I put enough research hours into what the Bible says to combat the apologist arguments. So I started like looking at some of the debates, and I was like, they're not bringing this up, and they're not bringing this up, and they're not bringing this up. It's all more philosophical based, and what is morality, and is God real? Those were the major arguments that I saw on the debate stages. And I didn't pick up other people's writings because I didn't want to be influenced in my own writing. I didn't want to hijack other people's conclusions. I wanted my own personal conclusions to be represented in the book, not anybody else's. So while I did have a couple of things that I quoted from other people, these are all my conclusions that I formulated. But it was once I started.
You don't go to, like, I'm a big fan of quoting the hell out of loads of other like experts. Like my books are just full of, particularly my sort of ones the resurrection and nativity that revolve around a lot of exegesis and historical analysis, where you are referring to other experts, and so it's like quote. Whereas you're like, no, these are my ideas, bosh, and I love that. It's great.
Well, and I think it just speaks to the fact that anybody can see these. If you really open your eyes and just sit back and look at this objectively, anybody can see these things. But I once I started those first few pages, then I felt like an urgency. And looking at the arena, there aren't women out there. And I want to be an example to other women to say, look, you can come out. It's okay. There's other of us here. You're not alone. But I do notice a huge disparity in the percentages of men versus women in this.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was important too.
Yeah. Which goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is great. Thanks. I'm speaking to a woman. This is like this. I don't know why this is why I can understand why it is with a load of like research and stuff, but it's just annoying that there is a preponderance of male voices in this kind of particular area. Probably on both sides of the aisle, actually, in terms of probably theistic writing and non-theistic writing. So your book. To me, and bear in mind, I haven't read it fully in depth. I'm about 3/4 of the way through. But your book, Crucifying the Bible, is largely about the internal inconsistencies and incoherence of the Bible, as a whole, but particularly and especially the first half is about those inconsistencies between the Old and the New Testaments.
Correct.
And I think, from a big picture point of view, not from a kind of little, this inconsistency, that, but a kind of like big kind of theological idea point of view, just
right.
The Old Testament and the New Testament are not really as close a bedfellows as people like to believe. Would that be?
Correct.
Is that fair?
Oh yeah. Because once I saw the like the main points, like the prophecies and the sin sacrifices, the rest of it just fell apart. And there are inconsistencies within itself. I know that has been, especially between the four gospels, that's been hammered on quite succinctly by other authors and other philosophers. And so I didn't go into that so much, but I really wanted to highlight the fact that, look, if the Old Testament is how you measure, is this the Messiah? If that is your plumb line, then you must use it as your plumb line. Otherwise, you have a Messiah who came to do away with what his dad did, which makes it a house divided, or he comes and adds these new things, and that's a violation of Deuteronomy 4:2, or he is God, and now all of a sudden he changed.
Yeah, and this is, one of your opening chapters is in fact called Plumb Line, where you kind of set out this idea. You've got a really nice list of 10. This is page 113, what you do really nicely throughout the text is have these bold statements, like not bold statements. Well, they are bold statements, but in bold as well. Like so on, throughout there, we're saying, right, this is what I'm saying, and then you kind of like go into that in a little bit of detail and say, right, this is another problem, a little bit of detail. So you can actually nicely scan the book and just like find little nuggets that really float your boat. So this nugget is: it is criminal to claim documentation written far after the death of an acclaimed Messiah that plucked phrases and titles out of the Old Testament somehow proves a Messiah. So to call Jesus a Messiah who does not check all the boxes is complete and utter insanity. So, and you list 10 reasons why he's not the Messiah. I always want to get into Monty Python here, but I won't Monty Python that. He is not a high priest and is not of the Levitical lineage. He is not a sin sacrifice. The crucifixion violates every single sin sacrifice law. 3, he is not a king. God condemns Israel for choosing a king to rule over them instead of God himself. He is also not anointed per the precedent Samuel sets anointing David. 4, one cannot call Jesus God. Jesus dies and God raises his hand and swears by heaven that he lives forever. 5, he is not the Prince of Peace because he says he comes not to bring peace but to divide. 6, we should not be called his bride. If a colloquial term, it should not be used when the literal definition violates the Old Testament laws. Taking the wife of his father usurps the laws he set for his people. 7, he cannot be peace offering. Human sacrifice is an abomination to God. 8, he cannot be called the Passover lamb because the Passover is not a sin sacrifice, must be eaten and the leftovers burnt. Jesus ate the Passover before his death. 9, and it depends which gospel you read there, Jesus cannot be called a prophet because he does not fulfill any of the major prophecies, and the prophecies about himself do not come true, and that's a huge one. And 10, finally, he cannot be called the new temple. The prophecy contains 3 chapters with the physical dimensions of the temple building, and then you go into the details of all these claims, but there you go. There's a list of 10 reasons you can't be the Messiah. And this is the real problem, is that Christians say he's the Messiah. But if you understand the Messiah in the Jewish sense of what the Messiah is or should be, Jesus is clearly not the Messiah, and he did not herald the messianic age. End of.
Right. And I love how somebody will take that entire list and then go, well, what about... And I'm like, did you not just pay attention to this whole list? Because if a Messiah fails to fulfill even one thing per the Old Testament, that cannot be a prophet or a Messiah.
Yeah, and so the Christians will then try and get around this with like, this is a new covenant that just kind of like does away with all the
they hopscotch, and it's all ad hoc rationalization.
But the problem with that approach is that you can't then at the same time say this is predicting the Messiah. You can't put a lot of store in the idea that the Old Testament is predicting this Messiah figure and then say, oh, and by the way, this Messiah is a completely different understanding to what, well, then what is this predictive quality going on here? And if the prediction is set within the Jewish context and you are completely removing that idea from the Jewish context, then you're just making stuff up. Is that fair?
Right. It's playing hot potato with scripture, saying, well, we'll just gloss over what the Derek.
Good old Derek. Love you, bro. Keep up the great work. Thanks, Derek. He's a legend in his own underwear. So thanks.
Totally a legend. He's a goat.
He's a goat. Greatest of all time, rather than a sacrificial goat. When we're talking about that in a second. I mean, if he is a goat, he's going to be the one. I don't know which goat would he be.
Not the scapegoat, Kayla. He's not the scapegoat.
Okay, he's not the scapegoat. Thanks, man. Really appreciate that, Derek. You're a legend. Thanks. So back to the Messiah. He's not a naughty boy. He is a Messiah, so the Christians say. So
but I love how they'll take that whole list and go, well, Isaiah 53, and I'm like, you know how much of Isaiah 53 is written in the past tense? I mean, verse 9 is backwards. Verse 8 uses the Hebrew word lamo, which is them. Verse 10 is like,
so what's the problem with that? What's
prolonged life.
What's the problem with using them?
Huh?
What's the problem with using them? I mean, you know.
Well, the Hebrew word lamo means them, not him. So it's
problem being
all of Israel is this suffering servant, not one person. You know, and I've said this before. It's like you take chapters 1 through 52, and then 53 to the end, and you're using one definition, but this one chapter we're going to use a whole other definition. Okay, sure, you do that.
I mean, just just with any of these prophecies, and I do this in my resurrection.
There he is. Not.
Yeah, Isaiah 53:8, for the transgression of my people was he them stricken. And I've done a video with Derek on the prophecies about the resurrection, which is to say that you look at any prophecy about Jesus and you remotely read outside the few cherry-picked verses, and you will get something that clearly does not apply to Jesus in any way, shape, or form. And as you say, the tenses of the verbs mean that this has already come to pass anyway. Right.
Psalm 22 is another one that they love to say that the King James translation used the word pierced, and I'm like, yeah, but the Hebrew doesn't say anything about being pierced.
Yeah, so it uses it should be pinned generally, but even if it's not pinned, they actually change it from dug to pierced. So even like dug doesn't really, like, your hands,
right?
You know, well, and that's even with the mistranslation. So
Tovia Singer did a fantastic analysis of that.
Yeah,
and so I can't take credit for knowing that one, but that was incredible to me. I'm looking at all these like foreshadowing prophecies, and Psalms isn't even a book of prophecy, technically.
No,
they don't even categorize it within their own scholarship. They don't categorize Psalms as something that's prophecy.
Yeah, absolutely. So, anything else you want to say on prophecies at all?
I'm good.
As I was just going through your book there, because I've got a few bits highlighted, I had to highlight the fact that you did. There is one person you've quoted, and you think, oh, it's going to be some big biblical scholar here. It's like Tim Minchin. I'm loving it already. Right. So science adjusts its views based on what's observed. Faith is the denial of observation so that belief can be preserved. Obviously, part of the song, hence the rhyme, I presume. But you know. I love a good Tim Minchin quote, and B, that's spot on. Faith there. But anyway, that's nothing to do with anything particularly. So what do you think then of this? Because I have this real problem with, I'm writing a book on the Exodus at the moment to go with my trilogy of books, Nativity, Resurrection, and where you look at Jesus and say, right, okay, so Jesus doesn't work historically, theologically, bit nonsensical, but then you say sits on a foundation of the Old Testament, and the which Exodus is like the main part of that. Then if you find that doesn't work, then what are you left with? And my idea is that if you completely take apart the Hebrew Bible, which is what you look to be doing here, theologically speaking, then how can you maintain a Christianity? Would you think that Christianity necessitates a belief in the truth of the Old Testament?
I mean, theologically, yeah, you kind of have to believe in some part of the Bible in order to call yourself a Christian, in my opinion. But the very definition in the name Christian would mean follower of Christ. So you take away the New Testament, and you kind of have a different theology. So now you're what? Trying to adopt yourself into one of the 12 tribes of Israel, which is just fine, because even in the Bible, it said that there was a mixed multitude in the wilderness, and the Jews were not supposed to treat anybody who was sojourning with them and doing what they do as anything other than native born. So the idea of adoption into one of the 12 tribes of Israel is even found in the Old Testament. So theoretically, you can. I wouldn't necessarily call that person a Christian, a believer, maybe. But I don't see how, if you really take an objective look at the Old Testament, specifically Genesis, I don't know how you can follow the God of the Bible, the Hebrew God.
What's your specific problem with Genesis?
Well, if you strip away all the platitudes and the dressings, the word salad, if you will, you're left with a horrible God, just with the book of Genesis. He gaslights his creation from the very beginning, saying it's your fault, but he created the serpent and he planted the trees. Then you're left with the flood, which is wholly immoral. Then you're left with telling Abraham to kill his only son Isaac when Isaac wasn't his only son. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Allowing Abraham to lie about his wife. The story of Jacob and Esau, where, why didn't God call that out for theft? Like, you're stealing your brother's birthright via extortion again. There we have extortion again. And you have Rebecca, who helps her son trick Isaac, and that seems to be okay for some reason.
You have Isaac, so
you her slave, and the angel says, "No, go back."
You talk about how Abraham is okay with haggling about Sodom and Gomorrah, but
right, but not for his own son.
Not for his own son. You're like, his own son is like, oh yeah, that's no worries. I'll kill him. That's fine. No problem. I'm not going to haggle about that.
Right. I mean, there's so much wrong just in Genesis alone, and then you bring in this seemingly bloodthirsty God in Leviticus, where he needs blood to forgive. I don't need to kill my son's dog to forgive my son.
Yeah. So hold that thought, because we'll come on to, because that's a really big area of your book, which is sacrifice and atonement, and rightly so. I just wanted to just go back to Genesis. I want to also mention Margaret in a second, because she's been really generous. But I love it on page 158 to 160. I have this problem that nowadays, when I read the Bible, it's so overtly mythological and so full of mythic tropes that it beggars belief that people actually believe this. And I know you're coming from a position where you believe it hook, line, and sinker, right? And so you've got a very different view to me, which is like, when I was a nominal Christian as a teenager, I didn't really know the Bible at all. But now when I look back on it, it's like, this is just bonkers. And you've got give this table that basically say these are just tales, basically, where you go, right. here's a thing, here's a description of what happens, and here's where it happens in the Bible, which is you go, and I'll very quickly just say, talking serpent, fruit of immortality, people living to 1,000 years, giants, languages are made, pillars of salt, Jacob wrestles with an angel, there's a burning bush, rivers turn to blood, burning bush, it talks and whatnot, rivers turn to blood, the Red Sea parted, magic food, water from rock, brass serpent heals, donkey talks, earth eats men, sun and moon stand still, endless flour and oil, rain from prayer, chariot of fire, a swimming axe head, army raises from bones, unharmed in the furnace, detached hand writes, Jonah lives in a whale, and so on. It's just this brilliant list. It's just like, yep, this is a mythological book, and those are nonsense tales. And if you told me any of those stories from another religion, I would laugh in your face.
Right. Absolutely. The last one I think is the funniest one. We even have teleportation. So the Bible's all about science fiction, fables, and mythology.
Yeah. Teleportation, which is from Acts 8:39 to 40. The Holy Spirit snatches up Philip and transports him to Azotus.
Right.
Yeah. It's, of course.
That's straight out of Adam's family.
Sorry?
The detached hand that writes on the wall, that's straight from the Adams family.
Yeah, nice. So Margaret de Velden, thank you very much for your donations. Really, really kind. And any super chats, please get them in, and we'll get questions to Deborah. And I don't know if she does, because she doesn't really go into, at least not until so far that I've read, into like gospel analysis, as she said earlier. But I hold Mark separate, and the other gospels respond or fix it. So Mark makes claims, and the other gospels are responding to them. I generally agree. Mark, after the war, had a different purpose than Paul before the war. Mark solves a problem. Does Deborah discuss this at all?
No, I don't get into the overlapping and the problems between the four gospels, except to say that they were all written by ghostwriters.
Meaning?
We don't have authorship, certificate of authorship on any of the gospels, and they were written far after the fact. I forget which one of the philosophers that I came across recently that said that the very first gospel written actually mentions the destruction of the temple, so its authorship must be placed after 70 AD.
Yeah, so basically, so Mark, the argument goes is broadly post 70 AD because he's predicting, the fall of the temple. Some people will disagree, some Christians will disagree, but generally I think that's a given. And then everyone's thereafter. And then there are now arguments. Now it's becoming a lot more accepted that Luke was seemed to know Josephus, which means that he has to be later than we originally thought. So sort of 85 onwards from Matthew and Luke, and then 100 or so for John. But yeah, absolutely. Speaking of, so thank you, Margaret. She's more Old Testament to New Testament holistically.
Right.
And which is, I think, is really, really interesting because when you start picking apart the foundations, then what are you building? What is this whole edifice built on? If the foundations are just rubble, then there's no connection between the foundations. It's almost like, here are the foundations, and the building that you say is built on top of it is actually built over there and doesn't even rest on these foundations. Right.
There's no glue between the two, really, honestly. But I had to use the Bible because that's what they claim is the truth. I couldn't go to outside sources like Josephus or the Philo-Judea of Alexandria to see what he quoted from. I could have, but I found it was much more efficient to use the scripture that they claim is true and infallible and inspired and on, and just say, hey, look, this is what your Bible says.
Yeah, that's the strength in that, is to say that this internally doesn't make sense. I don't need to.
You have to reconcile that, not me.
So yeah. I will stick with the Gospels because the idea is, I would say in my resurrection book, I say, right, John sees Jesus as a Passover lamb, which is why he says specifically that his legs aren't broken, just as the Passover lamb isn't, as according to the Old Testament. But the other Gospels don't see Jesus as a Passover lamb because they eat the Passover meal the day before. Right. It's a different day. So it depends which Gospel you read. But you do talk a little bit about Passover, and then you kind of link it with sin sacrifices as well. Do you want to go down the route of talking a little bit about sin sacrifices and maybe mention Passover?
Well, the only problem with that is the Passover is a completely different requirement for the offering. So the Passover requires a 1-year-old lamb, but in the sin sacrifice laws, a male lamb is not a sin offering. It is a female lamb or a female kid. So there's a completely different even requirements on a fundamental basis there that you have a problem with. The Passover is handled very differently. There's when you look at the original concept of it, you can't redo the Exodus, right? So they had to change how they did it as a memorial later on. But either way, you're slaying each one for his own family, or if their family's too small, they bring in another family to utilize this as a memorial. But it's also something that's done forever. So the requirement for Passover is something that is done for all your generations, for all eternity, in all of perpetuity. And a sin sacrifice, if you're going to claim that Jesus was a final sin sacrifice, then you cannot have the Passover as he represents that. There's a huge problem in trying to juxtapose Jesus against the Passover. Huge.
So this is the idea again, that you know, if you are trying to use the Old Testament as the gospel authors do, you know, they're trying to validate Jesus with reference to the Old Testament, but what you're doing is saying actually hang on here, because if you're really serious about the Old Testament, really serious about the Hebrew Bible, then all the stuff that we know about, supposedly know about Jesus, all the things that the gospel writers are saying about Jesus do not accord with the Old Testament if we're going to take it seriously.
Yeah, you can't square the two.
Yeah. So what can you tell us about sacrifices in the Old Testament and how they are problematic in light of what Jesus is seen as a sacrifice? And thank you so much, Old Before My Time, for your super sticker. Legend, thank you for your assistance.
Yeah, so there's a whole lot of problems with the Old Testament sin sacrifice laws, which are found in Leviticus 4 and in Leviticus 5. Somebody told me recently that that's talking about peace offerings. It's not. They're prefaced in the King James Bible at the head of these passages with sin sacrifice, not peace offering. But you have to kill it quickly, which is where the kosher laws come from. You have to drain all the blood at the base of the altar. You dip your finger in the blood and you put it on 4 corners of the altar. You anoint the altar. You do not anoint the sin sacrifice itself. Now, Jesus was specifically anointed for his death, and he literally said, "May this woman be remembered forever who is anointing me for my death." But per the Old Testament, you are not supposed to anoint a sin sacrifice. Full stop. It is supposed to be handled by consecrated and purified Levitical priests. It's supposed to be handled or offered in the temple. That should have been huge. We had a temple when Jesus was alive, per the Bible. Why would he not be offered in the temple if he was a sin sacrifice? You're not even supposed to come close to the altar if you're not cleansed, but you have this man who carried the cross, which in effect was the altar. And I guarantee you that cross was not cleansed and sanctified by Levitical priests and purified for this offering. There's so much wrong with it, and it's not supposed to be blemished at all. He was beaten and circumcised.
Yeah. Well, so Rob says here, how close does an analogy or type have to go though. I mean, if it had to fit precisely, he'd have been a literal lamb, right? So he's saying that, okay, well, that yes, it's not a perfect sin sacrifice. It's not a perfect.
Then he didn't fulfill the law perfectly. If it's not perfect, then he didn't fulfill it perfectly.
So therefore it's a problem, like, because in order to say, yeah, okay, I admit he doesn't fulfill the law perfectly, and this is a close fit or even a bit of a distant fit, then what does that say about all the what's the point of all those Old Testament laws, right? What's the point of the Hebrew Bible setting out these rituals,
right?
And God setting out those rituals, actually,
right?
So I mean, Leviticus and Exodus is arguably just and Genesis is just a way to deliver all of these laws, right? So
right.
some very good scholars basically say the whole Old Testament is about the laws. It's just about the moral laws that come, and Exodus and Genesis are just stories that basically lay the groundwork for the laws. There you go. They're the laws. So if it's all about the laws, and you're saying Jesus is fulfilling these kind of prophecies and fulfilling this Messiah figure and doing it through these within this legal framework, what you are coming on and saying is that no, he's not.
Right. I mean, and here's what your Bible says, and here's why these don't fit. You cannot try to squeeze this square peg in the round hole. It's not going to work. And to kind of make that long leap, or it's a huge stretch to say that Jesus fulfilled it because we can't take it literally. Well, then you have a house divided. If he is of his Father, then he should not be coming to change those laws. And any change of the laws or nullification of the laws, now you have a God who does change. So you can't say he doesn't. And if those laws are erroneous, or the covenant is erroneous, like the book of Hebrews likes to claim, then your God is not perfect.
So a bit of pushback, but isn't that a kind of fundamentalist pedantry? Are you being pedantic?
Yeah, well, I don't think I'm being pedantic in how I'm presenting this. I'm just saying this is what your Bible says. And if you're going to say that it's infallible and it's perfect, well, then the book of Hebrews should be tossed out because it calls the old covenant fallible, which you're calling your God not perfect, erroneous, sinful. But transgression of the law is sin, and the sin sacrifices transgress the law. The very act of crucifying Jesus was full stop a sin. It missed the mark.
Right. So this doesn't work as a sin sacrifice as set out by the Old Testament.
Sin cannot atone for sin.
So expand upon that.
So if you're violating sin sacrifice laws in the crucifixion, then the crucifixion is a sin. Therefore, sin cannot atone for sin.
Right. And the sort of sacrifices that we're used to having in the Old Testament, there's a table that you set out in terms of different sacrifices, giving you different things, sort of a bull, a young bull, so on and so forth. How does Jesus fit in with that? Why can Jesus not be like an even bigger sacrifice? How does that all work?
Well, yeah, a ruler was to have a bull or an ox, right? The poor could use turtle doves or even flour, which is not blood, right? But none of the sin sacrifice allotments allow for a human. The Bible says that he that is hanged is cursed of God. God never actually condones a human offering. He stopped Abraham from killing Isaac. So if he stopped it and provided a ram, then why would he turn around and make that the opposite, replacing a ram with a human? Where in the Old Testament, in Torah, the first 5 books, the law, it says that no human can die for the sins of another. So, I mean, there's so much wrong with this in its premise to make these changes halfway through this anthology. It's really just a collection of books that should never been put together in the first place. But if you have,
I mean, you're absolutely right, and you talk about how it's separated into what history, law, prophecies, and poetry. Sorry, and so you get these sort of different genres. That the problem is when Christians look back on the Bible, they just think they see it as that. Of course, that's the Bible, and of course, that's how it is, and that's how it should be, and it's this one like very coherent narrative going through. Whereas when you come from outside the Bible, like myself, I look at it and go, "Wow, this is a really weird collection of different genres and books that you have to really struggle hard to make coherent." And then when you put the New Testament on top of it, no, it doesn't make sense. And this is what you're showing.
Right. Well, even Christians don't know. I didn't know. 41 years in the faith, and I had no idea, or no, I did know. Up until my Hebrew roots conversion, I didn't know that the Bible from the year 1611 had 14 more books in it. It was right after my conversion to Hebrew roots that I got the 1611 Bible and was shocked. I'm like, there's more books in this that I've never read before, that I've never heard before. So I think it's a big disservice to not tell the parishioners in pews that their Bible used to look differently, or how it was written, or how it was compiled, or how it was ratified, or who wrote it.
I think that's a really good point. I've long said that because priests know this, right? They go to seminary and they learn this, and they know, or at least most of them know, that the authors of the Gospels were not eyewitnesses, and that these were written far removed from, and they weren't, primary sources, etc., etc., etc. And yet they never tell that to their flock.
No, you can't sell that, and people. Once you know it and you're behind the pulpit and your income depends on the message that you're selling, you can't tell your parishioners that.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying here, like a lot of what you write, the kind of the step change between the Hebrew, but the Old Testament and the New Testament, it speaks to me. I remember Justin Sheba used to call this Inter-Covenantal moral relativism, or intertestamental moral relativism, which is to say, here was a set of rules that were correct in an omni God that knows everything, and this is all like surely sort of perfect rules and everything. And then Jesus comes along and it's like, all those rules that were totally correct and they were right then, well, they're not right now. So we have so the context is what's changing. So this is moral relativism.
Right. So that's weird because the Old Testament calls the law perfect. It calls the law the way. It calls the law the truth. It calls the law the life. And then for some reason, there's this transfiguration from the law to Jesus, who violates all those laws.
Yeah.
Like,
and
what?
Absolutely. And then, but it's almost like such a big issue that it's not an issue, that people can look past it. It's almost like, it's so obviously in front of you that I can't see it. I don't know. Maybe.
I couldn't anymore, though. Like, to be intellectually honest with myself, I had to look at this and go, as much as I identify as this godly woman, as an ambassador for Christ, as a follower of Yeshua, as somebody whose entire life has been wrapped up in this, I have to look at this and go, wait, it doesn't make sense anymore.
Yeah. And it doesn't. You're right there. I agree with you. And so within all your many chapters and all the things you point out, I love the fact that there are so many really big ideas that don't work. Like it's the whole, like, again, to go back to, he can't be the Messiah. I've done a whole video on this before, which is like the Messiah is supposed to bring along a messianic age, which is peace to Israel, right? And peace to all nations. And literally, as soon as Jesus was crucified, Jerusalem was sacked, right?
Yeah.
The temple was destroyed. And you had Israel involved in conflict for the next 2,000 years. It's literally the exact opposite of a messianic age. So,
well, and we can't do more ad hoc, post hoc rationalization to this, because per the book of Revelation, he's coming back drenched in blood with a sword. So that's not peace either.
It just gets me that look, stop trying to say that he's a Messiah when he invalidates every single idea of what a Messiah should be.
Everyone, yes.
And so like literally using the term Messiah. How often do we hear Jesus mentioned as the Messiah? Jesus is a Messiah, and it's like, I'm going to stop you now. I'm going to stop you there, because he literally cannot be the Messiah. So let's get that sorted out, and then we can start having a conversation.
Right.
I don't know. But you also talk. Sorry, I'm getting ranty now. But you also talk about. So although I say that you pick apart the inconsistencies, those big level, those big picture inconsistencies in theological, like, I'd say, terminal problems, you also throw in a few of the classic biblical contradictions and ideas. One of the little ones which I wasn't aware of, and considering I'm writing a book on the Exodus, I'm going to now use this, which is, you know, supposedly God killed all the livestock, including horses, and then the Egyptian army are chasing like the Hebrews with horses and chariots. I'm like, damn, I never knew that one. I never thought of that. So thanks.
Yeah, that one was a shocker to me. I found that one actually a couple years ago, and I was shocked when I'm like, wait a minute, we have like 3 different areas where livestock are killed. How, if they were all killed up here in the very beginning?
Yes. So what do you think was the most surprising thing you found in your research? What's the thing that you're like, oh wow, okay, you know, that you didn't know you were going to get onto, and you're like, wow, this is something I've got to talk
about? You know, one of the things that I actually realized that was the most surprising, and it's right there in your face, right? It's absolutely, and I didn't even put it in the book, because I learned it later, or actually made the connection later, whatever you want to say. But God created that serpent, that cunning serpent in Genesis. God created. And then he turns around and gaslights his creation for listening to the serpent that he created. I'm like, what? Wait a minute.
Yeah. Okay. I've sent you this book, but you are going to love that, because there's all sorts of stuff like that in there, and that's a nice, easy read. You know, so you can absolutely bosh through that. But yeah, that's the sort of stuff. We'll get onto that in a second. But Doc Poromanouts, legend again. What an awesome person. How do we solve the riddle of a non-violent Messiah, like in Q, that replaced Davidic militarism with loving enemies and wisdom traditions? So this will depend on what your idea of a Messiah is, and there are different iterations. There's different versions of what a Hebrew Messiah might be, or a Jewish Messiah might be. What would you say about Jesus being a non-violent Messiah?
Yeah. Okay. Let's just forget about Revelation and when he's supposed to come back with a sword. Every time he had a well, first, love your enemies. I pretty much can guarantee that your enemies wrote that, right? Because that doesn't make sense. And if you love your enemies, they're not your enemies. So it's sort of an oxymoron on its face, right? But then when you hear Jesus speaking about parables, he always spoke in parables, but he always explained his parables at the end. And in Luke 19:27, Jesus is explaining his own parable and says, oh yeah, so by the way, those who don't submit to me bring them before me and kill them. Well, that's not very nonviolent. He was violent in his own terminology, calling the woman who's pleading with him to heal her daughter. And he's just ignoring her. His disciples are like, dude, what are you going to do with this woman who keeps crying out for you? And he finally says, and what? I should give that which belongs to the dogs. She's like, even the dogs get crumbs. He's calling her a bitch.
Right.
Even the Greek will support that. It doesn't appear that he was always nonviolent. He's turning over tables in the temple. That doesn't sound very nonviolent. He's calling other Pharisees and Sadducees vipers who were following the law.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's the idea of these, very stringent sort of law-abiding Jews.
Right.
Obviously, they're not right anymore. Yeah.
He's a hypocrite for saying that.
I mean, he certainly wasn't a militaristic leader on the other side of the coin. So
no,
the idea that if you're a Jewish, if you're a Jew who's waiting for this militaristic leader who's going to lead to this great new sort of Jewish halcyon days of awesome Jewish nation, then Jesus hasn't brought that about.
But in one of the most militaristic times in history, where you have battles and wars being fought all the time, for him to say to obey the governments, or the New Testament indicates you should obey the governments because God put them there. That's more passive and nonviolent, but why, in an era where people were being crucified, where wars were happening all the time, would you put that in there? Which government are you supposed to follow? This one over here or that one over there? What do you call, is God now creating an apotheosis of governments?
Yeah. Problems. There are many
massive problems just in that concept alone.
Just as an aside, James Apperson says Deborah and Jonathan are both on my Facebook friends list, so I'm practically famous. It's basically James has won. He's won life. I mean, I can't see past the fact that he hasn't won life. So Rob is presenting some pushback here. Rather than seeing this all as an inconsistency, isn't it deliberate? E.g., riding into Jerusalem on a donkey and a colt, if you read Matthew.
Right.
He cuts across the conquering Jewish Messiah expectation. So that this is kind of the reverse of expectation motif, that Jesus is coming in on a donkey rather than riding, I suppose, in on a chariot as some kind of militaristic leader. I don't know what your thoughts about that might be.
Well,
I suppose the idea is, can you have the Jesus figure can you have the Old Testament saying this is what you're going to get, and then Jesus flipping the expectations and presenting himself as something utterly different to that, and that's still to be coherent?
Right. Well, I don't know how you can take everything that's in the Old Testament, have him not fulfill all of these things. You have all these huge problems, and then you're going to say, well, what about this? What about this? Like that's what you're doing at that point. You're just willful ignorance at that point, forgetting all these other things, but just to point out that, oh, well, this expectation. I mean, that's not really being honest.
Sometimes I wonder how Jewish the early Christians were. So bearing in mind that Christianity in its early iteration was a Jewish sect, essentially, right? And then if you're forward winding 50 years on after Jesus died, or 40 to 80 years on, and you get gospel writers who are in a sort of Jewish diaspora or sort of Christian communities, brought up in Christian communities, possibly, then how much Judaism do they know? So when they're presenting Jesus as this thing, is there this chance that actually they're just not that? So they're kind of going back through the the Old Testament to find things that validate Jesus, but kind of decontextualizing them, cherry picking them, taking them out of context, but kind of not really understanding the whole Jewishness of the Messiah, of the rituals, because they're not in that context, and then presenting Jesus as a fulfillment of these, where Jesus most clearly isn't.
Well, it's almost like, and I love this parallel. It's almost like saying a rock climber who was bitten by a spider is now Superman.
In what sense?
You're taking little pieces and saying, oh yeah, he fits the mold,
right? Because
he was bit by a spider and because he can climb rocks. That's Spider-Man.
Right. Okay, I'm with you. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, not really, but. If that's the sword you want to die on, sure, go ahead.
Yeah, because you're saying let's highlight the commonalities,
right?
Which is to forget the really problematic differences.
Right. Yeah. Right. But you're going to find the same in other areas of other facets of life where this happens. If you have somebody pointing out, oh, well, Trump did this or he did that. Okay, but what about all this other stuff? You know what I mean? Yeah. And or one of my new realizations, and I have to thank Dr. Richard Carrier because he recommended Bo Bennett, Logically Fallacious. So you have Black Lives Matter, right? Well, when somebody says all lives matter, that's a relative privation fallacy that you're pulling and distracting and invalidating all of this stuff over here to highlight this. It's the same thing that the Christians do with the Bible. They highlight all these commonalities and forget about all the problems and invalidate your argument by doing so.
Right. Or attempt to. Yeah, absolutely.
It's absolutely fallacious.
So as we move into the final act here, I want to get back to Genesis because and this might be a problem for some modern Christians who will happily. Well, first of all, what do you say to modern Christians who will happily say, "Yeah, Genesis is mythological"?
If you're going to tear out Genesis out of your Bible, then you can't claim any of the rest of it is infallible or inerrant, because you're already admitting to problematic portion of it. So, I mean, I guess if somebody wants to do that and have their own personal, private relationship with the Bible or the God of the Bible without Genesis, sure.
Okay.
But if you're going to try to create a whole new religion and following and cult out of it, then I have a problem.
Okay, so maybe a bit more accurate to say, can you still theologically hold to a coherent? What does Genesis do theologically? That's really so. When you would be able to answer this hopefully better than I can because I've never been really this much of a Christian. What part does Genesis play theologically for Christianity?
Well, you don't have the ontology at that point. You're kind of missing what happens. Like you're missing the whole creator part of it. So then you can't really call God the creator. For one.
But if you're saying it's symbolic and say it represents God creating humanity and that humanity is all broken, I mean, there's a huge problem there. But do you think that? So for me,
you're missing original sin. The whole original sin is out of the question there too. Yeah. You're missing the entire backdrop of your patriarch, your father Abraham. You're missing all of that. You're missing tying Joseph to Jesus at that point. You're missing a lot of backstory. I mean, I guess you could, but then you're creating an entirely new religion at that point, in my opinion.
Yeah, and actually interesting. So these are possibly something I hadn't thought about, because I think, and I know people, and I think Rob, who's on the comments board now, has probably for some time thought maybe Genesis is symbolic or whatever. I don't want to put words in his mouth, which I just have. But it's like it produces problems, as Doc says here, is Luke's genealogy would fall apart. Of course, if you're trying to link, if it's all about linking Jesus to Adam, if Jesus is a second Adam, then that falls apart. If you're saying, well, Adam didn't really exist and was just a symbolic idea, then, well, actually, what are you trying to do in saying Jesus is the second Adam or whatever?
Well, you're even missing some of the backdrop of the story of Moses too.
Yeah. Which I think, this is broadly my thing about writing the Exodus book. It is, if you take away all these kind of big stories from the Old Testament, then if Jesus is coming to fulfill every jot and tittle of the law, and you're then kind of taking that legal rug out from under, what's Jesus really fulfilling? Because this law isn't actually, it certainly wasn't formed in the way it claimed it was formed in the Hebrew Bible, and so you've got a bit of a problem. But talk about, okay, I want to go back to the Garden of Eden, and we can forget the idea that the uncomfortable truth that the Garden of Eden story is based on ancient Near Eastern contemporary mythology.
Right.
Enki and Ninti, which is Ninti is a god of the rib, the new life, and the idea that, I mean, the whole story, and it's got talking snakes and tree of knowledge.
It's completely plagiarized, yeah.
Forget the idea that it is completely plagiarized, because it is. Okay. And think it's not overtly myth. What problem is there with the Garden of Eden story that you point out in your book?
Oh, well, aside the fact that God created the serpent, but he planted the tree, right? So he plants this tree in the middle of the garden in front of two newbies and says, "Don't eat them," right? Don't eat of this fruit, right? And but how would they know what was sin? How would they have any understanding that to sin is disobedience, and disobedience is sin, and sin is evil, without the knowledge first? To me, that was kind of a pretty big revelation in my journey and trying to put all these pieces together. It's like, now you're gaslighting people. And and the other thing I realized, well, he didn't actually curse Adam for his disobedience. He cursed the snake, he cursed Eve, and then he cursed the ground. But he didn't actually curse Adam.
So, although Rob here, again, coming back at original sin is an Augustinian doctrine and not Genesis doctrine, but still, even if you, without the whole larger idea of originals, sorry?
It is taught as Genesis doctrine. In any Christian church in the United States, they don't say, well, this is Augustinian doctrine. They say this is the Bible, and this is original sin based on what happened in Genesis. So it's taught as a Genesis issue.
Yeah.
So philosophically, sure, it might be something else, but that's not how it's presented. And that's what I have a problem with.
Yeah, but the point is that within Genesis, for sure, is the idea that God is getting angry with the fact that they have broken his commandment. And your point, and I have been saying exactly this in the last couple of videos. So when I read this, I was like, this is one of my arguments I love, which is the idea that how can they know what's right and wrong? And how can they know not to follow a command? So the idea is that the snake tells them something, God tells them something, and they've got no knowledge, right? They haven't eaten the fruit yet, and they have no moral knowledge. They have no knowledge in general. So it's like, I have no way of evaluating who is telling me which way, what's right and what's wrong.
But in this entire beginning story, God lied. He said, in that day you will die. And then he says, oh, they're just like us. We better kick them out of the garden so they don't eat of the tree of life and live forever. And live forever? I thought you just said they were going to die. So which is it? Is the tree actually threatening your narrative that they were going to die? This tree of life threatens your narrative that they're going to die? So you have to kick them out of the garden so they don't eat of the tree of life and live forever? Or are they going to die?
Yeah.
So God lied.
Yeah. There are just huge amounts of problems here. I go down the route of there being even more fundamental problems with the fact that these are contingent beings that God has created without and God has designed and created them in the full knowledge that they are going to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So do you know what? How can he be like, he knows this is going to happen and he's designed it such that it would happen. It's like, I know. So if you believe in omni-God that has full divine foreknowledge, God's sitting there without having created anything. He says, I'm going to create this world, right? And I'm going to create Adam and Eve as the first people, and I'm going to create a tree of knowledge of good and evil, and I'm going to put them in this garden. I'm going to tell them not to eat from the tree. But you know what? I know I haven't created them yet, but I know that they're going to eat it anyway.
Right.
And then he goes, but I'm going to create anyway. I'm going to do this anyway. So he has
blame them. And blame them.
And then blame them. It's like, hang on, they didn't create themselves in such a way that they would do that.
It's so psychologically abusive at that level. It's unbelievable. But this omni-God could not figure out how to get an omni-coherent message out to the people.
As Doc says, entrapment is a felony. So I think when you start, just like for me, like, well, we've just started in the first story over here, and there's light without the sun and all that. So like the very first stories, and then moving on to Garden of Eden is like, and then when you got Noah's Ark, which is like he knowingly creates humanity, knows what they're going to do, and then goes, oh, I've cocked up, and then starts again and just like throws everything off the table. He's like, oh, look, I've cocked up. This is rubbish. Just gets rid of all humans. Just starts again. You're like, already this is a nonsense book. Like, this
is like a kid trying to play Monopoly and he just tosses the whole board with all the pieces off. Like, he throws a tantrum. Oh my gosh. His kids, the sons of God, go down to mate with the women, and he blames society for that problem by killing them.
But and it's not only the theological problems with this, but if you're really, I mean, this is. I'm going back to the big list that you presented, which shows very clearly that this is a mythological book. When all these crazy stories, it's like, do you really believe someone lived to 1,000? I mean, like, no, honestly, do you though? Like, let's sit down and like, do you really believe that they lived to 1,000? And do you think there were these giants moving around and the Nephilim and the and Behemoth, and like, do you really believe it? Don't just, I know, like, yeah, I believe it, and don't think about it. Like, tell me, did people live to 1,000? Because we've got no evidence.
969 years old, Methuselah. Yeah, that's pretty old.
So how, when you were this kind of Christian, was it just like Teflon? Was it just like, yeah, of course I did? Like,
you want to know how I actually wrapped my head around that, the mental gymnastics I did?
I'd love to. Okay,
so my mom actually was in meditation and devotions one day, and decides to try to think about, how do I believe this? And she said that God gave her the answer. Okay, the mental gymnastics begin. She claims that when the garden was created, it said that a mist came up, and that's how all the plants were watered, was this mist came up. And it says that there were waters above and waters below. So she's like, well, it was a whole greenhouse. And we see that in the right conditions, reptiles can live and just keep growing and keep growing and keep growing. So if you have a greenhouse effect over all of the earth before the flood, because that's how the waters of the earth were covered, all this water covered the earth because there were waters below and waters above and the mists and its greenhouse. But when the flood came, then all of a sudden you're not in this greenhouse effect anymore. Now you have real tangible sunlight, and most of the waters were blown off the face of the earth into space, I guess. But now you don't have a greenhouse effect. So now the lifespans are shortened. But that's where the dinosaurs came from, and that's where great life came from. That was the mental gymnastics.
But where do you start? Yes, okay, but I would just, yeah.
You're just like, bloody hell.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm like, oh, we need to go back to the start here. We need to really like, but it's the fact that none of this is evidenced at all, like in any of the sciences. Well, but it's like, yeah, whatever. And I suppose if you believe, this is a problem when you talk about miracles, if you believe in a magic God that can do kind of anything, then God can just do anything and then make it in such a way that all the evidence has disappeared. He like does some crazy stuff and then gets out a broom and sweeps away all the evidence just before humans come along, and he goes, you'll never know. I don't know why.
Yeah, honestly, the buck stops at God. That's really, so anything that happens in a corporation, right? Yeah. You don't just blame what happens in your business on your people. You're the one that opened and started and ran that business.
Man, you're gonna love this book. I keep saying that, but you've just told me back one of my analogies I use in there, which is God designs humans, and he's a CEO of a car company. And like if you knew ahead that you were not only the CEO of a car company, but the designer of cars, right? And you design this car that you know 100% is going to go out and crash and cause injury and death, and you go like, I know that's going to happen, but you design and create it anyway, and it goes out and does that kind of crashing and death causing, and then you go, so surely you'd be held up in a court of law as being somehow responsible for that happening. Right? But not only that, then eventually you go, oh, you know that crash that just happened that killed all those people? Well, that's your fault, that is, and I'd like payment for that.
Right.
Like that's that needs atonement, so I need some kind of payment for that. But hang on, you just designed and made that happen. Like we did that, you did that, and you knew that was going to happen. No, I want payment for it from all of you.
Well, and here's the other thing. I think my husband was the one that came up with this one, but I'm not sure. He's like, how do you have grace if it requires payment? Like you can't buy grace, and you can't, there should never be an exchange that's happening for grace. So if this God is all merciful and all and full of grace, why does he require payment for it?
I've never understood grace. Just it kind of, don't quite understand it. There you go. I think it's a real problem. Rob, pushing back.
Word salad. I think it's word salad.
I would agree. Rob says it's a Mesopotamian text. Again, not an infallible Bible. But this is the thing is, it's not. It is an infallible Bible. If you believe, I believe you. I believe it's not an infallible Bible. But if it's not an infallible Bible, it's just a holy text from a particular place at a particular time that is really interesting, but is no different from the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Right.
There's absolutely no difference. So yes, I agree with you, Rob. But there you go.
Honestly, I found the 42 laws of Ma'at to be of greater morality than the 10 Commandments.
So the 10 Commandments do look very much like self-interest of Yahweh. But what's interesting in writing my Exodus book is looking at how the covenant code and the legal codes in the Old Testament come to be. So you get the covenant code, you get the Decalogue, and you get all these different Deuteronomic laws. And then you see, okay, they're based on the Hittite laws, and then Unamu, and then Lipit Ishtar, and the Code of Hammurabi. And actually, you see this genesis of laws. And what Christians do is they take the Bible and they try and say this is exceptional and sits on its own and is not. There's no intertextuality. It doesn't depend on any other sources. It's just this thing that is right.
But which one? Which one of the 10 Commandments? Because there's 2 different types in the Bible. So it's like you can kind of pick and choose. Which one do you like better? Let's just decide.
And actually, many of the laws that exist are written in different ways depending on which author. And sometimes those ways written are not quite coherent Enlightenment. But my point would be that you've got this evolution of law codes that goes to the Bible, but it doesn't even stop at the Bible, right? We've got the UN Charter of Human Rights, and you can map that back right the way back through time to the Code of Hammurabi and these earlier legal codes, and of which the Bible plays an important part, right? It's not to say that the Bible's not important. Of course it is, and many of our laws are based on that, but it's not based on the Bible. It's based on the law codes that are also based on these previous law codes, and then continue on through that in other law codes and philosophies that are brought in, especially post-Enlightenment.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't have the corner market on morality. And when you look at the Bible contextually, it's not moral.
But when you were a Messiah, when in your messianic phase, your Hebrew roots phase, how did you understand the problematic legal sort of the problematic moral laws or stories in the Bible?
Well, for one, it didn't seem to me that we had a continuation. Like, we understand now in our current society that slavery is wrong. So I just understood that based on the time period they were in, that it was allowed at the time, but because we have evolved, then we're good. And we don't white knight for slavery right now, at least in the United States, right? That I know of. And save a few fringe people. But I just realized, I was just like, okay, well, we're not doing it anymore that I know of, so we're good. But, a lot of people told me, you're under the law, you're under bondage, da 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 da. I'm like, how is putting a parapet on your roof so somebody doesn't fall off bondage? How is quarantining the sick, bondage? Those part of the 613 laws and mitzvahs of the Old Testament. So I found there were quite a few things in there that made sense. Some of them absolutely made no sense. Like, why would you have a law about not mixing fabrics, but you remain silent on child rape?
So
I didn't get that.
Well, I do actually. I think there's a really good theory of why that is the case. So isn't it? It's what is it? Linen and wool. So one comes from arable farming, and one comes from sheep farming, and it's exactly why Cain and Abel. There's a difference between Cain and Abel. So Cain, one of them is arable, and one of them is your animal farm, livestock farming. Right. And then, so when you look back and understand that, I think it was the early Israelites, before they were Israelites, were from the hill people who were very much your grazing animals and livestock, came down onto the plains, and it was so that you had a coming together of these two different cultures of two different farming types. And the Canaanites, it was all to do with the early history of these peoples. So these stories are actually based on the idea of, like, Cain and Abel represented these two different peoples in the same way that linen and wool represented these two different peoples. So you shouldn't mix them. And so that's I've read some stuff on that, which is really fascinating, but of course has absolutely no bearing upon humanity outside of that tiny little parochial context.
Right. Yeah, and if he knew that his word was going to be carried out throughout the centuries, coming out of it, I was like, why isn't it something that every generation can understand and fully comprehend, and why is it not coherent? It should be, if you're going to put a message out to all the people for all time, it should be coherent for all time.
Drop mic, because quite frankly, Deborah, you're absolutely right, because obviously, but if you produce your revelation and in advance, what your revelation is going to be, and how it will be interpreted and used, right, then to not very clearly say, and by the way, rule number 3 of the Decalogue is slavery is really bad, don't do it. Rule number
Right.
4 is please refer to rule 3, because I'm just going to reiterate slavery is bad, don't do it. So, because God has produced a revelation that he knows people will use a curse of Ham to go and justify slavery for thousands of years afterwards.
Well, yeah, rule 2 should have been slavery is bad. Rule 3 should have been owning another person is bad. So for any reason, owning a person is bad, not just for labor, not just for their talents, but owning another person in any context is bad.
Yeah.
Don't do it.
Yeah. There's that lack of clarity. And then it's also, what the Bible doesn't say, which is like, oh, and by the way, the other things it doesn't say, like slavery is bad. It should have said that. It should have said, boil medical instruments in hot water, in boiling water, because then when you do surgery, you're not going to get, I'm going to explain, it would be great if the all-knowing God could just reveal like the germ theory. Like you're flipping through like Psalm 38 is God, the germ theory of like.
Right. Or bloodletting. Right. So don't do that. That's bad.
Yeah.
But
Doc, legend, re-engaging common versus statutory law development exposes good. I don't even know what he's talking about already. Exposes that modern interpretive frameworks permeate the Pentateuch 4-source law traditions, and they are really a function of time and place.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of big words there, Doc. I'm going to have to break that down. I think you're absolutely right, and I mean the problem. You talk a little bit about the 4 sources.
Yeah, I think he's just basically saying that having these different types of laws really showed how they came about with the documentary hypothesis framework, and understanding that we do have more than one author of the Pentateuch.
Yeah, so what the documentary hypothesis is, very quickly for those who don't know, is that no matter what, all Hebrew Bible scholars, modern Hebrew Bible scholars, say that there's multiple sources to the Bible. Whether you believe that they're in the full source JEDP, or whether you believe in supplementary hypothesis or fragmentary hypothesis or whatever, is all the same kind of idea, which is there are multiple sources for the Hebrew Bible, and that is incontestable. Right. And so therefore, this is why you get repetition. This is why you get redundancy. So you get repetition is useful in certain narratives if it serves a purpose. But when repetition doesn't serve a purpose and it's kind of like it's redundant, then there's no point in it being there. But that's full of redundant repetitions, the Hebrew Bible.
Well, yeah. And the other thing is it sort of exposes the problems, too, because some of this redundancy isn't consistent. Yeah, you have different terminologies used, or a little bit different, like replacement of certain things are used. And so you find that while you might have the same thing being said, this person uses a little bit different terminology or replaces words altogether. So that's how we know that there were different authors in the Pentateuch.
Yeah. Exactly, and then it goes. So the spectrum then goes down towards actual flat contradictions, and so on and so forth. So all of these things point to like all the contradiction problems of the Hebrew Bible. All of them are explained by the documentary hypothesis. If you deny the documentary hypothesis, then you have to explain each and every single contradiction individually in an ad hoc way.
Right. Well, one of the I have an entire chapter on atonement, and what I found surprising was that you have this Old Testament that says, hey, for this, and this, for these atonement reasons, you're going to sacrifice these beings, right? But just in the Old Testament alone, there are 10 other forms of atonement that don't require blood. And then if you bring in the pseudepigrapha and the Apocrypha into the mix, now you have 14 different types of atonement that don't require blood. This is why we know that there are more than one authors to the Hebrew Bible.
So what are some of those other ways that you can have atonement then that don't require blood?
Fasting, prayer, gold, flour,
yeah, why not?
hyssop, charity, alms, just off the top of my head, those. Yeah.
For you as a Christian, and please, anyone who wants to get in any questions, just as we move towards wrapping this up, if you have any super chats, or I don't know how long you can keep going, so I'm just saying that.
I'm not in a rush.
Okay, that's cool. But please get in your super chats and questions. That'd be great. When you were a Christian, how did you understand atonement? Given that there are so many different theories of atonement. I mean, the idea that Christians, for example, have so many mutually exclusive understandings of atonement goes back to this idea that there is a lack of clarity in what's going on in the New Testament here. How did you understand atonement?
Well, it wasn't until later in my faith that I was really trying to understand it, because, going from Christianity to Hebrew roots, now you have a Day of Atonement. So I really wanted to dig in and find out, what am I really honoring here? And what I come to find out is, regardless of whether it is the sin sacrifice laws of the Old Testament and the animals that were sacrificed, or the crucifixion, there is only sacrifice atonement for unintentional sin. The other types of atonement, which I think is completely backwards, honestly. I think intentional sin should have required blood, and unintentional sin is reconciled through prayer or fasting or whatever. So I think just in the very concept alone, it's completely backwards, in my opinion. But I had a hard time later in my belief understanding why God would allow his own son to be killed. That didn't sit right with me the last year or so, as I was fully understanding the Day of Atonement. I'm like, why would you even have a Day of Atonement, even just for your own Jews, your own chosen people, not Jews, Israelites? Why would you have a Day of Atonement for them? And have this narrative that's been browbeaten into any believer across the world that this God is benevolent. Why would you need blood in any form, whether it's animal or human? That was something that was just a little bit of a nag just in the last couple of years. Before that, I felt like, yeah, okay, we needed Jesus to die on the cross for our sins. We should have all been up there on the cross. We all are filthy. We all are dirty. We all need this covering of the blood. Ooh, I have such a problem with it now.
But I want to go. I want to just like I've heard before. So when you say like human animal sacrifice, burnt offerings, it just, why would God need blah blah blah? And they say, well, yeah, but they're not wasted. The animals are eaten afterwards, and actually, blah blah blah. And it's like it's the context, and it is what they understood at the time. It's like, are you telling me it's this idea of progressive revelation? It's the idea that people in that time who were offering burnt sacrifices were too thick, too stupid to understand if God came down and said, oh, do you know what? You are burning these animals and sacrificing them to me for whatever reason. I just want to let you know, I don't need you to do that. Were they like, right. Are they too unintelligent to understand that? Like if God came down and said, don't do that. You don't need to sacrifice animals to make me happy. I'll tell you what you need to do. Be nice to your friends and families, and actually people you don't get on with. Try and like have a nice society, or you don't need to make me happy by burning animals. Like, so I don't get this progressive revelation. It's how they understood it, and they wouldn't have understood at the time. It's like slavery. They wouldn't have understood if God had come down and said slavery is bad. Well, if they're saying slavery is good, someone could come down and say, by the way, it's not good. That's not like crazy to understand. Sorry, I'm ranting.
Jonathan. Okay, so Jonathan, here we have Jesus saying, forgive your brothers 40 times or 49 times 7 or 40. 70 times 70, 490, 70 times 70. Forgive your brother. But God can't forgive us that many times without bloodshed. Like, this is before the sacrifice of Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, he's telling us to forgive our brothers, but God can't forgive us in the same manner.
I wonder if does that mean that God's not omnipotent? So atonement, if God is like, if he's needing some payment in order for him to forgive, then he's not able to forgive. He doesn't have like that much mercy. I thought it's perfectly merciful. Like, surely you could just forgive. By the way, if because the end result is he just forgives anyway, but he needs Jesus to die. He needs himself to die in order to forgive. You're like, well, that's a bit weak. Surely you can just forgive it.
Well, there's Nineveh. There's 2 Chronicles 7:14. If my people turn from their wicked ways, I will forgive them. Right? No blood needed. Why all of a sudden this change in the narrative? Like, yes, you need to have blood. No, you don't. Yes, you do. No, you don't. Yes, you do. It's all throughout the Bible, back and forth, back and forth. It's completely bipolar. But you're telling me I need to forgive somebody else without them giving me blood of an animal or a person or whatever else. There's this transaction that doesn't require blood between me and my brothers, but God can't do that between him and his own children. Like, it doesn't make sense.
No. So thank you very much, excuse me, Butts, for your Canadian donation. Really, really, really appreciate that. Thank you. I'd love to hear Deborah talk a little bit about her identity crisis following her loss of faith. So this is moving back off the book subject to your psychological
meltdown
challenges. But actually, and I will add to that, because you mentioned your husband a few times, and I'd be interested to know what his place in this was. Was he equally as much as a believer as you, and was that journey at the same time as each other or not? Or but first, would you be able to answer, excuse me, But's question at all?
Yeah. So when I came across these videos challenging the validity of this New Testament Messiah, my husband watched the first one. I made him watch the second one, but he was done. He was just completely done with the New Testament at that part. It was immediate for him. I required more study to prove what this gentleman had said in his videos. I needed to investigate this for myself, which I did.
He was still good with the Old Testament, is that to say?
We were both still good with the Old Testament immediately. Like,
that's after weird. So you do the opposite to what most people do. They like get rid of the Old Testament. That's obviously nuts. And you go, right, let's concentrate on this nice New Testament. You're like, New Testament's nuts. Let's go to the Old Testament.
Right. So we were both preparing to convert to Judaism. We were looking at synagogues. We were looking at which tribe to adopt ourselves into or graft into. And but once I had finished with my vetting the New Testament and saying, yeah, he's right, none of this makes any sense, I had to be honest with myself and start investigating the Old Testament, which I hated doing. I did not want to be this odd duck out. I had already lost a great deal of people by that, 3 months later. I had already lost it. Friends and family and my community. So now here I am looking at, my community is going to get even smaller. Now I'm going into Judaism, basically. And I wouldn't even entertain the Talmud. I just wouldn't, because I was like, that's been handed down, and then written. So that game of telephone, I could not even entertain it at all. But I spiraled really, really hard, and in bouts of depression, crying in my bed, crying in the living room, face down. It was, I don't know what that is.
Marcion. So Marcion was the heretic who very influential in the early days, said that the Old Testament was absolutely nuts and was like a jealous demiurge god. And then he was like, we should only believe the Gospel of Luke. And then he got quite a big following and then was deemed a heretic and whatnot. But he saw the difference between the Old and New Testament. But Doc's saying, obviously, you went in reverse. But yeah, carry on.
Okay. So I had to get away. I said to my husband, I need some time. And I knew of a mind and body retreat in Florida. So I went down there for a weekend and just kind of had a dump. I did some yoga, did some breath work, with some other people, and really found a good center point to come back and with clear thinking, and let me just live for a few weeks. And then I picked up the Old Testament and went through that. And that's just a really hard identity crisis when you lose everybody that you lose your entire foundation mentally. It just, the rug was pulled out from underneath me. I would wake up in the morning and find myself having to stave off panic attacks because I'm like, I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know what my purpose is anymore. Now it's just a rat race, daily grind. What am I here for?
Yeah.
And so I had to figure out.
Welcome to my life. Yeah.
I had to figure out, like, we find meaning in life. Like, I needed to find that meaning for myself, not for anybody else. And nobody else can find my meaning for me. Like, I need to find out what my purpose is. And it's not anybody else's responsibility to make me happy. I need to find that happiness within myself.
How did you find the people around you reacted? So I mean, this is quite alien to me. This doesn't really happen in Britain. We're really religiously apathetic, and no one really has much of a deconversion thing. And if you do, we don't have the social network scenario. Particularly, there are obviously church communities and whatnot, but generally speaking, in America, very different Bible Belt, blah blah blah. You are your whole identity is enmeshed with your church community and society around you.
Well,
and so how did that play out, family and friends?
So when you're in a religion in the United States, it is your identity. Like, there are people here, especially down here in the Bible Belt, that have their faith on their bumper stickers for all to see. Like, that is who you are. It's not a shock to find somebody praying for somebody else in a coffee shop. That is what it is like here. You have telephone poles where people have pulled up in a pickup truck and climbed a ladder to get as high as they can on the telephone poles to staple up Jesus Saves in bright yellow. And they're all across the estate. It spans several states where you find that here. It is a full identity. So when people tell you that it doesn't exist, shunning doesn't exist in Christianity, that's only like the Amish, that's just the fringe groups. No, shunning is a real, tangible, measurable, statistical thing that you can actually put in front of other people's face and say, yes, it does. And then you have religious trauma syndrome because of all the fear that was pumped into you as kids with the hell and the rapture and if you deny me before other people, I'm going to deny you before my God. Oh my God, my entire afterlife is shattered. And then dealing with that fear and that trauma and processing.
That's a really big thing. So not only do you have the interpersonal trauma or like social ramifications of like leaving a network of people and not only not having that safety net, but then maybe being negative towards you. but you also have the internal psychological struggles of having heaven and hell as the most ultimate emotional blackmails that you can conceptually have hanging over you. Like, if I've got this wrong, I'm going to hell, and I'm certainly not going to be going to heaven. So did you struggle then?
For a little while, for a few months. But once I understood that the concept of hell is not really in the Old Testament, and that in the Old Testament, Satan is really just a quality inspector, that went away. But the psychological damage that had already been done to make me this second class oppressed person as a woman, wherein I hadn't pursued higher education for a lot of years, because I felt like my job was to be a wife and a mom. And sure, I can have a job, but I need to just stay submissive, and I should not ever be in a position of authority over a man. And so this
was that something that was really like prevalent in your community, in your life, in your situation?
Yes, in the Pentecostal churches, in the more fundamental Christian churches, they want you to be submissive, stay at home, wife and a mother. Yeah, maybe as the kids get older, you can have a part-time job here over at the Hobby Lobby or an antique store or whatever. But just keep it small and administrative, and just everything was a gender role. Everything was a gender role. Cooking and cleaning is a gender role in Christianity. Taking out the garbage is a gender role. It's like there isn't anything that wasn't already categorized and set for me that I didn't have to readjust and reevaluate. Like everything.
Excuse me, but adds in, do you think the book was a working through of those identity issues?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. The book was incredibly cathartic. I mean, even the one I'm reading now has been even further process of healing. That one's going to be pretty heavy, guys. So watch out.
So,
if you think this one's heavyweight, just wait.
What are you writing now? What's your next project?
So the next book is really delving into more of a psychological analysis of the Bible.
In what way? How does that work?
So we know God and his characteristics based on his Bible. We don't have anything else to measure who God is other than this religious text. So I'm taking the psychological definitions and understandings, what we know now today to be moral, to be healthy, to the boundaries, the personalities, and then the disorders. And I'm just going to lay them out and let the reader make the connections.
So the psychological personality of that God,
yes, not just that,
or the relationship, or both.
Right. So here's what he said, here's what he did. How does that measure up to what we consider to be a healthy mindset today? Right. And then I'm going into, I don't think Yahweh would look too great after a psychological. Exactly. He wouldn't. And that's what I'm doing. I am putting the God in the Bible. Yeah, I know. I'm putting the God of the Bible onto an assessment. And then I'm showing how the Bible addresses women, children, and slavery in that context.
Is a believer an abused spouse or something?
Right. It absolutely is. But the gaslighting, the economic abuse, the mental manipulation, the emotional abandonment that you find in scriptures, just to name a few, are so prevalent in showing God as malevolent is it cannot be understated.
Yeah. So what in so far in your research for writing that book, what's the biggest thing that's surprised you or made you go, oh my goodness, this is worse than I thought?
I'm still waiting for the DSM-5. I pre-ordered it like 2 months ago and it's still not here. But I'm not a teacher or a student, so I didn't get priority shipping. But so far in looking at some peer-reviewed articles and looking through some studies, just really how manipulative the scriptures were written. They're masterful, but they're diabolically masterful.
Yeah.
And they're filled with all these platitudes and word dressings and salads that just try to hide how horrible this God is and what he seems to be okay with, what he whether it's lying, whether it's sending evil spirits, whether it's flooding, whether it's ordering the execution of so many people.
I think that the flood one, if I did the audio version, like giving her a male voice, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously my English accent is more correct than an American accent, just by nature of my colonial past. But
I'm
yeah,
okay. I'm actually okay with a man doing the audio recording on this book, on this next one, because it might actually, unfortunately, give it more weight because we're still in a patriarchal system.
Controversial, self-fulfilling prophecy or something. I wanted to just mention the flood again, because you're right. You talk about people, right? I have this idea that the not only is the flood ridiculous, and it's obviously a ridiculous story,
it was a waste. He said you're wicked before, you're wicked after.
Yeah, it was like it didn't work, and it doesn't make sense, and it's nuts, and you can't get animals, and it doesn't. None of it makes sense either historically, physically. You can't make a boat like that.
Right.
You can't flood. There isn't that many water molecules in the world. Blah 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 blah. There's a whole list of things why the flood didn't work, both theologically and historically and physically. And you get to this situation. Well, why did so many people believe it? Still 80% of people, I know there's 2003 poll in America, ABC News poll, was it 80% of people believe the flood, or certainly in somewhere between 60 and 80, and you're thinking, okay, that's pretty crazy. It might have been in the 60s actually, but anyway, the idea that why do so many, the question is, why do so many people believe that? And you think, okay, if you're a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, and you're listening to these songs and you see these nice picture books about, and the animals go and do the 2 by 2, hurrah, hurrah, and you're like, and it becomes part of your cultural memory and baggage, and then you don't question it, and it's your elders telling you this, and what happens is that is embedded in you before you understand what is plausible and implausible, before you get a veto system about what is clearly nonsense, right? And then you learn that later, but that's already lodged in there. So that's why someone believes that story, and they never really question it as being an absolutely freaking terrible story. Because when I look at it now and go, God has literally killed unborn fetuses and women. I mean, if you're pro-life, like, God has wiped out. You can't tell me all of those people are so evil. They were all so evil that they deserve to be killed. But God is the one that created them and knew they'd be that evil. So God is ultimately responsible for that anyway. It's like,
well, they were so evil because of his sons who had come down and created Chimera. So, like, if you created all the angels and you created your host of heaven and your sons of God that were up there walking around with Satan, per the book of Job, then why did your perfect creation up in heaven come down and mate with the women? Didn't you give them a set of laws to abide by? But now you're going to blame humanity and kill all of them for your sons' problems.
Yes. I mean, I think when if you just say, right, I'm going to start again, I'm going to forget all that I think I know and all that I've learnt as a kid and whatever, and I'm just going to look objectively at the flood story.
Mm-hmm.
Once you do that, you're like, okay, that just can't work. That can't work. It can't work on any level. Thanks to Canadian Catholic who's dropped in. We've had a debate before. Why does Grace look like Aubrey Plaza? I don't know what that question means, Canadian Catholic, but thank you for your support. I really do appreciate that. Thank you, CC. Are there any other before we? He says, ask her. Do you know what that question means?
No, I don't know who Aubrey Plaza is. I don't keep up on television much anymore. I watch movies with my husband, but that's about it. I don't watch cable. I don't watch a whole lot of TV.
Okay. There you go. But thank you anyway. Yes. So, as we draw this to an end, what else would you like to say about your book, Crucifying the Bible? Is there anything you'd like to add?
So it recently has just become available on hardback, but I have it in Kindle, paperback, audio as well. I'm close to halfway done with my second book, so that's awesome. As far as I know, my book is only available on Amazon. Although they did do some external shipping to either bookstores or libraries, but I don't know which. They won't let me know which. So it has been approved for extra distribution.
Right, brilliant. Yeah, excellent. Well, I really do suggest everyone goes out and buy her book. It is a fantastic book. Really enjoying reading it. I was wondering if we can, as we draw to a close, whether I can give you my quick fire questions, which I haven't thought of yet, but I'm going to pluck some out of my posterior.
Absolutely.
Which is, okay, let's start. What's your favorite non-fiction book? Got a tough one already. She's struggling.
Wow.
The Bible.
I don't know.
So what book, when you were doing your research, maybe what was a book you're like, yeah, that is brilliant, that is really, or helping you in your deconversion? What's been the most interesting book that you've read in the last sort of 5 years where you're going like, yes, that's you've recommended to others?
There's one about lies and statistics by Levin that I found was really, really helpful for thinking critically. So I found that one to be pretty amazing.
Favorite fiction book?
Oh, fiction. I don't know. I haven't read a whole lot of fiction.
You know what?
I should probably go back. There's one that talks about I always forget the names of books that I'm reading, so I apologize for this. But there's one about the Gospels, the Zodiac and the Gospels, and I can't remember who that was by. That's fantastic. So that kind of brings in astrotheology into the mix, which, pretty much all religions hijacked from anyway. So going back to even further and older is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, there's that consistent argument about how much is the Bible astrotheological and not. And some people are like really, or hook, line, and sinker, everything's astrotheological, and some people are like, nah, not so much. And everyone
right. Fictional. For a lot of years, my favorite fictional author was Daniel Steele. Just right.
Old school.
Yeah, I don't know how you can really go wrong there. I liked that for a lot of years. I haven't read her books in probably 10 or 15 years now, but for a lot of years that was my go-to.
fits well into the sort of Christian lifestyle, maybe, and I don't know, and then like not really controversial.
It was just clean romance.
Yeah.
Okay,
for a favorite film or TV series?
Right now, definitely Yellowstone.
Never even heard of it. Brilliant. So I'm going to have to go and look that up.
Oh, yeah, probably that tops Yellowstone. Probably tops all the shows, all the movies that I've ever just loved is Yellowstone.
Okay. Brilliant. I'm going to have to look into that. Okay, if you were to listen to a single piece of music or song on repeat for like a month, what would it be that you couldn't get bored of too quickly?
Unchained Melodies
by the Righteous Brothers.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I had my first ever slow dance to that song. with a yes, I remember her name. But
yeah, I've had that song. I've literally had that song stuck in my head for about 2 years and didn't get tired of it.
You can't complain with that. Nice one. You're just about to be executed. I do apologize. You've offered your last ever meal. What would your last ever meal be? Your meal that you want to go out having just eaten?
Okay. Medium ribeye with a bottle of Italian Cabernet.
Oh, nice one. Interesting. She's gone with the wine choice as well. Very particular. Excellent. And a place that you never visited that you'd love to visit?
Ireland.
Why is that?
I have roots there. My genealogy goes back to Ireland, not all of it, but a portion of it. And I've always been drawn to Ireland. I think it would be absolutely gorgeous to go there. I heard it's so beautiful and green and lush, and I love everything about that culture.
I don't know if Risk Help has just come in from the beginning of the video. I'm so right there with her. There is freedom in admitting I don't know, which is what you're saying right at the beginning of the talk in regards to religion and what happens after we die. Letting go of Christian myth can set you free of an oppressive life. Thank you for that. Absolutely right. Okay, you're just about to have your face eaten off by a horde of zombies, and so you run down into your apocalypse shelter. And you're allowed to take with you 3 people who aren't in your family or friends, 3 dead or alive people that you have to sit for a month with in this fallout shelter. Who would you take with you? Three people.
Family or friends?
No, famous people, ostensibly, that you would like to spend a month with. 3 of them.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Jesus.
Audrey Hepburn.
Right, nice.
I know this is going to sound maybe creepy fangirl, but Dr. Richard Carrier.
Okay. Yeah, creepy fangirl. But that's cool. Actually, do you know what? I said him as well. I when I answered this question whilst talking about with someone else when I asked him this, which is I'd love 3 people that vehemently disagree, which would be someone like Tavia Singer, William Lane Craig, and Richard Carrier, right? So you get like 3, and then myself. So it'd be a bit like 2 on like whatever. But yeah, so I did mention him, so it's not too creepy. Third one?
Yeah. And then wow, I guess that, but you said dead or alive, but not family. So I couldn't bring my mom in.
Yeah, go on. Tell us why your mum's in there.
She's already passed away, so she's
yeah.
meets half the criteria.
But this is an insight into your life, so this is what we want to know. Why would you take your passed away mum in there? Don't get too
well. Okay, so no, it's fine. So it was a couple of things that she told me that led me here. One of them was I'd rather be slapped with a lie than kiss, or slapped with the truth than kissed with a lie. Nice. And then she also told me virtually the same thing you said earlier, in that you cannot massage the facts to fit your belief system, right? So though between those two things, I was actually allowed, I had the permission mentally to process these contradictions and look at things objectively. But she died in Hebrew roots. So I would love to sit down with her with, somebody who's entertaining, somebody who has a lot of logic and critical thinking in their repertoire to see if my mom would in fact convert to non-belief.
Really good answer. Thank you for that. I'm glad I allowed your family member in there, because I'm obviously the arbiter of who gets to go in a fallout shelter with you in a zombie apocalypse. So James, thank you for your super sticker. You are a legend. I really appreciate that. He says, I don't want to get eaten by the zombies. I'll try and make sure that doesn't happen. Which is of course my time of spamming the audience to say I've written 2 fiction books, Survival of the Fittest, Metamorphosis, and Survival of the Fittest, Adaptation, about people who get caught in such an apocalypse and about their moral dilemmas and things like, philosophy, lots of philosophy in there, and God and not God and whatnot.
Well, we do need to figure out how to avoid zombie Jesus.
Have you seen the video online? If you haven't seen this, and this is the same to all the viewers here, Fist of Jesus, right? Go and Google. It was like a B movie. They did some crowdfunding to see if they can make it into a full length feature movie, but they haven't. But it's like a 10-minute, really well filmed, really good quality filmed, like a B movie of Jesus resurrecting Lazarus, I think, and then Lazarus coming back to life as a zombie, and then there's a zombie apocalypse, and you've got Jesus, and he's killing people with like fish and stuff. It's absolutely brilliant.
It's not, I think it's funny. I actually put this in the book. It's like, Jesus wasn't the first fruits, right? They say he was the first fruits of the dead. Well, he raised Lazarus. There was a whole load of people that resurrected at the time of his death. But Ezekiel, I think, stops the show when he raises an army of bones and they go home to their family to show the power of God. I mean, to me, that's like, if you want your zombie apocalypse, look no further than Ezekiel.
Yeah, true that. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely true. Like even and in Matthew's parade of zombies around Jerusalem, at the death of Jesus, you've got it's there for you. So the idea that Jesus is the first fruits and heralds the general resurrection. I mean, obviously that didn't happen anyway, but it's just not true. So you've nailed it there. Nice one. But as ever, not as ever. Remember, check Fist of Jesus. Go on the YouTube after this. Check Fist of Jesus, guys. It is brilliant. Good bit of entertainment. Don't show your Christian family members or friends, because they might get a little bit like, why is Jesus going around killing zombies? It's just, and there's loads of blood. It's just really fun. But it's good stuff.
And check out Jonathan's books.
Naturally, thanks for the bring it back full circle. Yeah, excellent. But before I leave, before we say our adieus, obviously, please help Deborah Grace out by supporting her and her work in buying her book. Her book, I can thoroughly recommend it myself, even though I haven't finished it. I thoroughly recommended reading like the first 3 quarters. So absolutely fantastic. Really, really interesting nuggets all over the shop. Thank you so much, Deborah. And if you want to come back and speak about anything else, and particularly your upcoming book and the project that you're working on, please feel free and hit me up, and we can do this again.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Cool. Well, thank you to all of my supporters and all the people that have joined in and watched so far. Really appreciate all the super chats, as obviously allows me to continue to do what I'm doing. When I sit here and there's a window just here, right, and my partner walks past, and then because I've been YouTubing for 2 hours, and she scowls at me, like I can at least justify her that you know what, it is helping to pay the mortgage and helping us like live. So and then she's like, oh, okay then. That's all right. So thank you. That's my poor me story. Thank you, Deborah. You've been an absolute pleasure to talk to. How can people find you? Do you want people to find you?
Oh, yeah. No, I have a website, crucifyingthebible.com.
Crucifyingthebible.com.
Yes. I have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok now, YouTube, among Goodreads. Yeah, so I'm not easy to miss. I mean, yeah.
As in
I'm out there.
virtually. Yeah,
You'll
you're out
find
there.
me wherever yeah. Her book was great. I underlined profusely.
That's fantastic. Well, you can't get
Thank
better
you.
than that, really. You know, thank you, Marianne, for that endorsement. In fact, that on her second edition, that's going to be on the back cover. So it's not. So sorry, I'm not promising that, Mary. I can't promise that on her behalf. Yeah, thank you for everyone. Thank you. Go and find Deborah out there. She's out there. You can't miss her, apparently. So just Google anything, and she'll come up first in the Google search. Just be Crucifying the Bible. You're like, I'm trying to find out what's going on in Ukraine. Crucifying the Bible, Deborah Grace.
Right.
So please, yeah, absolutely. You can't miss it. Thanks ever so much. Really appreciate that. Thank you, Deborah. You take care. It's been great talking to you, and I really appreciate hearing your views on everything. As ever, everybody, question everything, particularly yourselves, and don't make, don't live in a world where God is as a third party throwing God's meaning and purpose onto you. Right? Take the nobler option, like Deborah was talking about earlier, which is creating your own meaning in life. You'll find it is liberating, and it's far more empowering to create your own meaning rather than have meaning thrust upon you from a third party. And I'll leave you with that little nugget. Take care and all the best. Bye-bye.